In 2012, Charlie Kirk and Bill Montgomery founded Turning Point USA. Bill Montgomery died in 2021 because he did not take COVID seriously. Charlie Kirk died this week because he did not take gun control seriously. Let's fucking go. The road is about it. Let's fucking go.
Hey poor! Hey poor! Hey poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Powered by Adrenochrome.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, located not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is in my lap demanding attention. Lord Nibbler has just leapt onto the back of my chair because he's jealous. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and he's cats. Get over it. And this is a news show episode where I cover stories related to secularism, atheism, or I find just plain interesting. Nibbler, get off the keyboard, buddy. Thank you. Next episode will be either one of the other infancy gospels or more of Satan's invisible world. Haven't decided yet. Haven't heard back from any of you if you have a preference. Now, let me get started with this episode here. One thing I want to say is that it is amazing to me how my mindset has shifted over the years, because at one point in my life I would have ascribed a different significance to Charlie Kirk being murdered than I do today. You see, I had put the script basically together Sunday night. I wasn't able to record because I had gone to the monthly potluck of the local Democratic Party. They had a speaker, and by the time I got done with that and got the script finished, I had to go to bed. Monday, I get up and go to work, come home, and Tuesday is trash day, so I have to get the trash out here. And I get the trash out and just tired when that's done. So I'm like, I can't record, I'll do it on Wednesday. So I get home from work Wednesday. I'm going through the episode and something is just not working. And I don't quite know what it is. And I get halfway through it and I'm like, I just can't do this. This isn't right. So I scrapped the episode because I'm like, I just can't do it. You know, I've got the stories, but there's still something not right about it, and so fuck it. And then I'm on my way to work this afternoon, and stop off to get myself something to eat. I notice a notification on my phone, Charlie Kirk has been shot. I'm like, oh, wow. And then I go and read the details about it, and a whole bunch of shit just starts dropping into place. Now, ages ago, I would have thought that the universe or something was causing me to fuck up and not be able to record until this particular moment. Because, you know, it was important that, you know, I not put out an episode until this happened. Now, of course, I'm an adult, an intelligent human being, and I realize, purely coincidence. Now, as of this recording, we have no idea who shot Kirk, or even why. And I am not going to speculate on any of that, because I just don't know. But I'd be willing, well, I know for a fact that lots of people are already saying, well, it was this or that kind of person who did it. We don't know. We won't know for some time. We may never know. You know, the suspect is described as a white male with a rifle in Utah. Well, that's half the population right there. So, but, Alex Jones, no doubt, will be shouting from the rooftops about this or that related to the thing. I am eagerly awaiting the next episode of the Knowledge Fight podcast, because I'm sure they're going to address that, because, you know, Alex Jones is going to try and milk this for all it's worth. I will have more to say about this all in the politics section. But for right now, let's get to the other news.
We have found a witch, may we burn her?
Okay, this episode's people executed for witchcraft or heresy are the Colchester martyrs. Between 1545 and 1558, 26 people were either burned at the stake for heresy or died in prison awaiting execution in Colchester, England. These were not Catholics, these were Protestants, because this was before Henry VIII had finalized control over the Anglican Church. And one of the reasons that there was and probably still is, considerable animosity towards Catholics in the UK were these 26 people who are considered martyrs, and I did not have time to go through and look at each individual to see what their story was and why they were executed. There are a couple of them, there was just no information at all on that, but they were Protestants who were executed by Catholics.
I'm quite happy to be an atheist, because I think actually God likes atheists better. We never ask him for anything. We're not bothering him all the time, saying, oh God, please help me, I want this thing.
From religionnews.com. At NatCon, an effort to make Christian nationalism a more inclusive movement. During the Bible and American Renewal breakout session at this week's National Conservatism Conference, Josh Hammer stood out as the lone Jewish person on the panel of otherwise conservative Christian activists, a pastor, the editor of an online Christian magazine, and a self-described Christian nationalist. Yet it was Hammer who told an audience member that America was founded as a Christian country. "I'll be the first to say that," Hammer added. "There is very little doubt in my mind about that." The exchange was a window into a curious dynamic that permeated NatCon, as attendees call the conference where speakers and organizers alike worked to craft a vision for a stridently conservative Christian America that somehow steers clear of anti-Catholicism and especially anti-Semitism. Hold that thought. A right-wing gathering that was once considered fringe, NatCon now boasts among its alumni Vice President J.D. Vance, and this year featured a number of Trump appointees and allies, including Russell Vought, Office of Management and Budget Director, who helped craft Project 2025, Kelly Loeffler, Director of the Small Business Administration, and Steve Bannon, a longtime podcast host and former chief strategist for President Donald Trump, and a convicted felon. Okay, I am going to have a bit to say about all this, but I want to read you the next headline and a bit of the article that goes with it from the same site, and this is just below that first story. At NatCon, a confusing resurgence of anti-Muslim sentiment. During a breakout session at this year's National Conservatism Conference on Wednesday, September 3rd, one group of panelists was asked an unusual question. Really? This is an unusual question for a Christian conservative organization? Did they consider the U.S. to be a Protestant tree in which Jews and Catholics are allowed as birds to nest in the branches? Josh Hammer, the only Jewish member of the panel, aka Token, eschewed arboreal analogies, but replied that he believes Jews and Catholics have always been a part of the American story. A more interesting question he offered is what founding fathers had to say about Mohammedanism, a reference to Islam. Fellow panelist William Wolf, head of the Center for Baptist Leadership and a self-described Christian nationalist, interjected, "I'm happy to cut that branch off, Josh." The crowd burst into laughter. The episode was one of several derogatory mentions of Islam at the conference, a 3-day convening at a hotel in downtown Washington. Once considered a far-right fringe gathering and still deeply associated with Christian nationalism, because that's what it fucking is, NatCon, as it's known among its regular attendees, has become a major waypoint in the conservative calendar. The ideas germinated here increasingly shape the ideological framework of the Trump administration, as speakers at past conferences have gone on to become MAGA stars, including Vice President J.D. Vance. There's absolutely nothing confusing about this if you're at all familiar with the saying that goes, conservatism consists of exactly one proposition, to wit, there must be in-groups whom the law protects but does not bind, along outside groups whom the law binds but does not protect. That also aptly describes religion as well. Because what does every religion teach? If you follow the tenets of this faith, you will have a successful life and a successful afterlife, assuming the religion believes in one. If you do not follow the tenets of this faith, then you are a terrible person, will be doomed to a miserable existence and a horrific afterlife. Again, assuming the religion believes in such a thing. That exclusionary principle, and othering, as people often term it, is necessary for the propagation of the faith, be that by preaching or at the point of a sword. If an organization like NatCon can't be anti-Semitic, then they're going to have to find someone else to hate. They're not willing to go full mask off with their racism just yet, so they're going to pick a target that they think will garner them some support, or at least lower resistance to some of the shit that they do by vocally attacking Muslims, as well as other marginalized folks who are in, say, the LGBTQ plus community. Something that I want to make very clear that I don't think anyone has said is that Israeli actions in Gaza are likely going to make the world a much more dangerous place for Jews. Much of the global opinion about what Israel is doing in Gaza is negative, yet many governments refuse to take steps to slow Israel's genocide, even though a majority of their population wants them to object to the genocide. Now, the reasons why governments are slow to act are fairly simple. For one thing, the governments that likely could have the most influence over Israel are ones that have committed genocidal acts in the not-too-distant past. Another thing is that a lot of surveillance technologies used by governments around the world were developed by Israeli companies, and they don't want to lose access to that. Additionally, the Israeli government buys a lot of weapons from places like the US and the UK, so defense contractors will put pressure on various governments to keep selling the Israelis weapons. Next, you've got fundamentalist Christians demanding that their government support Israel unconditionally because they want to bring about the rapture, which will lead to the death of Jews, but that's, they don't talk about that. Finally, you have the fact that there's a number of pro-Israel organizations who are more than happy to donate to political campaigns in exchange for support for Israel. As you can see, there's some complicated reasons for why action isn't being taken to try and stop what's happening in Gaza, and I haven't even mentioned the fact that Trump thinks he can get even richer by slapping his name all over buildings in the area after the war. But you know what the takeaway from a lot of folks will be? Jews rule the world. So they're going to be less likely to deal with legitimate cases of anti-Semitism in the future. And sooner or later, organizations like NatCon will have no trouble saying, we don't think that the Jews should have a voice in our country. Because again, conservatism, like religion, is based on an exclusionary principle. And when you're seeking an edge over someone who has the same ideology as you, the easiest way to claim one is to be more extreme in your beliefs than others. So since they're trying to gain power, they're going to be more open in who they allow into the group. So, whereas in the past they weren't okay with Catholics and Jews being a part of it, they're happy to have them now so that they can wage war on Muslims. If they can manage to strip political power from Muslims, then they'll go after the Jews. After that, it'll be the Catholics, and then whatever Protestant denomination has the smallest footprint, and so on. This is also why those who think Democrats should move to the right to appeal to Republicans are wrong. Because if you're a Republican and your choice at the ballot box is a Republican candidate versus a Republican-like candidate, why would you choose anyone other than the Republican candidate? Oh, sure, you may not like that the Republican candidate wants to ban all forms of birth control, but you almost certainly can't stand the idea of a candidate whose party is pro-abortion or pro-LGBTQ plus rights. If you look at how folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and AOC first got elected to Congress, you'll discover that they all ran in safe districts for their party, and they pitched themselves as being more extreme in their political ideology than their opponents, who happened to share the same party. Because they knew once they won the primary, the general was a cakewalk because the Republican candidate, or the opposing party's candidates, never stood a chance of winning, regardless of who they were up against.
That really is a nice collection. Must have taken you a long time to hunt down all that history.
from heritagedaily.com. Intact Roman helmet from the First Punic War discovered. Archaeologists have discovered an intact Roman helmet while conducting an underwater study near the Aegean Islands off Sicily's western coast. The helmet dates from the time of the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, the first of the three major wars fought between the Roman Republic and Carthage, the two main superpowers competing for domination of the Western Mediterranean. The conflict was mostly fought on and around Sicily, resulting in the island being annexed as a Roman province and Carthage forced to pay large reparations. Remarkably preserved with both cheek pieces still intact, the helmet has been identified as a Montefortino type, a military helmet used from around 300 BCE through the 1st century CE. This doesn't look exactly like how one expects a Roman helmet to look. The cheek pieces are identical to any that you'd see in a Hollywood movie. The helmet itself, however, looks like a cross between the hat that Radar on MASH wore and one of those German helmets from World War I that looked like it had a pickle stuck to the top of it, though in this case it's more of a nub than a pickle. Still, it's different than what you've probably seen. And the preservation of the helmet is incredible. There's some corrosion, and parts of one of the cheek pieces is missing, but to look at it, you wouldn't think that it was 2,000 years old. If someone told you that it was a prop from a movie made 100 years ago that had been fished out of a lake or something, you'd find that far more believable than it being 2,000 years old. There's not even a dent on the thing, from what I can tell. From archaeonews.net, Purdue professor documents 53 biblical figures confirmed by archaeology. Spoiler alert, Jesus ain't one of them. For centuries, debates have raged over whether the Bible is history, myth, or something in between. Now, significant research by Purdue University Lawrence Mxyzptlk, I can't pronounce that last name, and frankly, I don't care, has given fresh weight to the argument that the Bible reflects real historical figures. In his recent article for Bible History Daily, Mxyzptlk compiled evidence confirming the existence of 53 individuals mentioned in the Bible through archaeological discoveries. Skeptics might ask, how do we know these inscriptions actually refer to the name of the same individuals as in the Bible? Mxyzptlk insists on rigorous criteria. A name alone is not enough. There must also be matching details such as title, parentage, time period, and location. Only when all align does he record a strong identification. By applying these strict standards, Mxyzptlk has confirmed 53 figures ranging from well-known kings like Ahab, Omri, and Xerxes I to lesser-known officials such as Jehukal, a royal aide at the time of Zechariah, Jeremiah 37:3. For Mxyzptlk, the project is not about proving faith, but about respecting history. Quite apart from religious faith and based on a large amount of clear, concrete evidence, I find no reason to reject and many reasons to accept the general historical credibility of the Bible, he told Biblical Archaeology Report. His findings challenge a trend in modern scholarship that dismisses the Bible as unreliable unless independently proven. By confirming dozens of figures through archaeology, Mxyzptlk shows that the Bible, at least from the era of King David onward, aligns significantly with the historical record. Now, here's where the article fails to mention some pretty important things. For starters, no single historical work should be considered accurate unless its claims have been independently proven, because That's just good science and history. Let me give you an example of why this is so. One of the Virginia newspapers during the Civil War never gave its readers any indication that the Confederacy was losing until Lee surrendered. The readers of that paper were stunned when the news came out because they had no idea that the war was going so badly for their side. If that paper's archives were the only evidence you had of the American Civil War, you'd not know that what happened during the war was radically different than what they portrayed. Even if you had archaeological digs of the battles that they described, and assuming that all of the battles they talked about were real, they might very well have made some up. You wouldn't necessarily be able to tell who fought at those battles or who won them. Nowhere in the article does it say that the professor confirms the people he says were real did any of the facts that they're credited with in the Bible. So sure, this or that king might have been real, but that doesn't prove that they did what the Bible says that they did, or that those events even happened. Also, just because you have a historical document that says so-and-so did a particular thing, such as building a monument, and the monument exists, that doesn't mean that the document is accurate. Lots of rulers around the world have been more than happy to take credit for something that their predecessor did or started. One just needs to look at the discovery of King Tut's tomb to realize this. Nobody had any idea of who Tut was until his tomb was unearthed. Why? Because the guy who came after him did his best to erase the record of Tut ever existing. Years after the tomb had been excavated, somebody was looking at an obscure section of a temple and found mention of Tut. It was in a hard-to-reach place and thus probably forgotten. Everywhere else that one would expect to find a record of Tut had been altered to erase him. Really, all this guy has done is managed to prove that there was likely someone with the same name as a person mentioned in the Bible. That doesn't mean that they did any of the stuff they're credited with, nor that the Bible is a historical document of any reliability. After all, Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter mentions real people and real events, but that doesn't mean it's an accurate account of Lincoln's life. From archaeonews.net, did archery begin in Asia? 80,000-year-old arrow pushes archery's origins from Africa to Asia. A remarkable discovery in the foothills of Central Asia may push the origins of bow and arrow technology back by thousands of years. Archaeologists working at the Abi Rakhamat, I think that's how it's pronounced, rock shelter in Uzbekistan have identified tiny stone points that appear to be arrowheads dating to nearly 80,000 years ago, making them the oldest known evidence of archery in human history. The findings, published in PLOS ONE in August 2025, describe over 190 micropoints found in the site's deepest layers. Many of these miniature stone chips show fracture patterns and microscopic impact traces that strongly suggest they were used as projectiles launched from bows. If confirmed, the discovery would predate the earliest known African bow and arrow artifacts by at least 6,000 years, shifting the epicenter of this critical invention from Africa to Asia. And to make things even more mind-bendingly confusing, we're not even entirely sure who made these arrowheads. When I say we're not sure, it is possible that these arrowheads were made by Neanderthals or others. The part of Uzbekistan where they were found has remains from Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and some that are definitely in the same family as us and Neanderthals, but might not be entirely one or the other. They could be a human Neanderthal hybrid, or they could be something else. Maybe a Denisovian, or perhaps an entirely new group to science. Apparently, at roughly the time when those arrowheads were made, That part of the world was a bit of a melting pot where different types of humans and different groups of humans were present and passed through. I realize that to us in the 21st century, bows and arrows might not seem all that sophisticated of a technology, but that's because we've been exposed to them our entire lives. Some of you, if you were like me, probably made shitty ones when you were a little kid. They didn't really work, but it was a thing that you played with because you saw someone in the movies or on TV use one and you wanted to do the same. Think about what it would be like if you'd never seen a bow and arrow. Would it occur to you to take a stick, bend it, put some leather between the two ends to ensure that it stayed bent, take another stick, glue a pointed rock onto one end of it, and yes, they did use glue, glue some feathers on the other, and then you use your bent stick to send it flying. Those are a lot of steps. Then you have to get to refining your creation, because even if it kind of works the first time, you're still going to spot problems with it that you'll want to improve in the next version. Maybe the bow's not right. Maybe the arrow's not right. And let me stick with the history of technological improvements to bows for a moment. Roughly 4,000 years ago, the first composite bows were invented. These are bows that are made out of more than just wood and string. They'll have not only different types of wood, but also different types of material, such as bone or antler, used in making the body of the bow. Laminated bows, which is a bow made out of different types of wood glued together, are roughly the same age, perhaps a little older. Nobody is really certain. The advantage of these types of bows have over one that's made out of a single piece of wood is that not only do you not have to worry if you can't find just the right piece of wood to turn into a bow, but you can also tune the bow to have different characteristics than one made out of a single piece of wood would have. So you can have a compact bow that has as much power as a long bow, but is easier to use while on horseback. The first compound bow, which is one that has pulleys on it, was invented in 1966. So, just 60 years ago. The Egyptians had pulleys as far back as they had compound bows, but nobody seems to have thought to put pulleys and bows together until relatively recently, and the advantages a compound bow has over other types of bows is enormous. Or to put it another way, humans happily used the wheel and the bow for several thousand years before anybody thought to put the two of them together to make a more powerful weapon. Guns didn't really become a thing until about the 1500s, so we had more years with wheels and bows than we had with guns, and it still didn't occur to anyone to make a compound bow until recently.
Maybe it's a little early. Maybe the time is not quite yet. But those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Silently, they orbit the sun, waiting.
From CNN.com, a spaceflight activates dark genome in human cells, researcher says. Spaceflight makes certain human stem cells age faster, a new study has found, furthering scientists' understanding of the potential effects of space exploration on the human body. Stem cells are found throughout the body and can make more of themselves or turn into other specialized cells, including blood, brain, or bone cells for maintenance and repair. In space, stem cells decline in function, said lead study author Catriona Jameson, I hope I pronounced first name right, director of the Stanford Stem Cell Institute and professor of medicine at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. They actually reduce their ability to renew themselves or regenerate, and that's an important thing to be able to know for long-term space missions. The study does not prove that humans can't survive for long periods of time and space, however. What it says is that if people are in space for a long enough period of time, they may be at greater risk for things like leukemia. The problem also seems to go away once people return to Earth. There's also some indications that the problem is tied to the lack of gravity. This means that it may or may not be a worry for folks in microgravity, and someone on the moon or Mars may not have to worry about it at all. Not mentioned in the article, but something that I think is worth speculating about, is if this is close enough to what happens in the body before someone on Earth develops leukemia, and we find drugs to prevent this from happening in astronauts, we might be able to use those same drugs to treat people who are in the early stages of developing leukemia. And naturally, since you don't want astronauts barfing or losing their hair, any such drugs are necessarily going to have fewer side effects than chemotherapy tends to have. From space.com. Scientists capture interstellar invader comet 3I Atlas growing a tail. This image is both a scientific milestone and a source of wonder. Astronomers have captured a stunning image of a tail growing on interstellar invader comet 3I Atlas. The image was captured on August 27th, 2025 by a team of scientists and students using the Gemini South Telescope located on Cerro Pachon, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in Chile. Discovered on July 1st by the Atlas Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, 3I Atlas is just the third ever object found drifting through our solar system that is believed to have originated from around another star. The previous two interstellar intruders were cigar-shaped Oumuamua, officially designated 1I 2017 U1, discovered drifting through the solar system in 2017, and the comet asteroid hybrid 2I Borisov, discovered 2 years later in 2019. All these objects offer scientists a unique opportunity to study material from another planetary system, and the growing tail of 3I Atlas is a tantalizing glimpse at the material that lies within this comet. But this opportunity is limited, as happened with Oumuamua and 2I Borisov. 3I Atlas's orbit will eventually carry it out of the solar system. Now, if Avi Loeb was a serious scientist, he'd stop saying that this was potentially an alien spacecraft because it's acting just like a comet, so the odds of it being an alien ship are basically nil. But he's not, and he's spinning crazy stories about how all of this proves that it's aliens. It has been roughly 8 years since we detected the first interstellar object passing through our solar system, and we are now up to our third. All of this is possible because of the various new telescopes that have come online in the past decade or so. We have no idea how often such objects may pass through our solar system. There's absolutely no way we, with our present technology, could slap together a probe to check out one of these things, even if we spotted it when it was farther away than Pluto. We could, in theory, build a probe and just keep it laying around until we spotted one of these things headed our way, and hope that when we spot one, it's practical for us to stick the probe on a rocket and shoot it towards the object. I have a better idea. Mind you, there's no way the U.S. will ever do this so long as Trump and his ilk are in power, but go with me here for a moment. What we ought to do is build two types of probes. One is a generic probe for planets in the inner solar system. You know, it orbits Mars, Venus, or Mercury, and is equipped with cameras and other gear like you'd find on a planetary probe. The other is designed to orbit the outer planets. It has the same gear as the others, plus it's going to need a RTG for power and to keep the electronics warm, because solar cells aren't really powerful enough to do a lot once you get around Jupiter. These probes would also have enough propellant on board that if an interstellar object was passing through our solar system, at least one of these probes would stand a chance of breaking orbit around the planet it had been assigned to and coming within observational distance of the interstellar object. Design them with something like a 5-year lifespan and have a plan in place to replace them with one that has improved electronics, etc., at the end of those 5 years. I realize that doing this with Pluto is basically an impossibility, but you get the idea. And before anyone screams that we have all these problems on Earth that we need to worry about, let me just say that not only do we have the money to do both, but by doing things like this, we can help solve the problems on Earth. Studying weather patterns on other planets helps us to understand our weather better. What we lack is the vision and the will to do both. Developing the various technologies needed to do this will also help us on Earth. One of the reasons why we have digital cameras is because of the space program. The folks designing the Hubble realized that conventional camera technology wasn't good enough, so they came up with digital cameras for the telescope. Electronics that can handle things like the G-forces during a rocket launch, as well as the harsh radiation in space, means that we have better electronics for use on Earth. Computer chips in smartphones are now so small that the folks designing them have to worry about the effects of random cosmic ray particles hitting them. Large magnetic fields can also screw up electronics. If we could find a way to easily shield stuff from large magnetic fields, things like high-speed maglev trains, which can be more environmentally friendly than conventional trains, will be practical. You know where we have to worry about large magnetic fields? Orbiting Jupiter. Between the start of the war in Iraq and 2017, the U.S. spent at least $1 trillion on just the Iraq war. We also spent about $1 trillion in Afghanistan. That's an average of over $71 billion a year just for what we spent in Iraq. And that's the low-end estimate for that war. The total cost of the Galileo probe to Jupiter, which also dropped a probe into Jupiter's atmosphere, was less than $2 billion. That's not only the development of the probe and launching it, but that of the salaries, etc., of the entire mission. Even doubling or tripling the cost of the thing still has it well below what we spent in a year in Iraq, and doesn't involve a whole lot of people dying in horrible ways. There's 7 planets we could reasonably consider sending such probes to with our current technology, or tech that we could expect to develop in a relatively short period of time. That get us an insane amount of data. Even if no interstellar objects pass through our solar system during the expected 5-year lifespan of the probes. Hell, even if you jack up the price of each probe to $10 billion, we're still saving $1 billion a year over what we spent in Iraq. Plus, if we kept on a cycle of sending a new probe to every planet in the solar system except for the Earth and Pluto, and the existing probes had an actual lifespan longer than what they were designed for, as happens quite often, then we could find ourselves in a situation where we could send the older probe after an interstellar object while leaving the newer probe in orbit around the same planet. Or, if the interstellar object seemed particularly interesting, we could send both. Another possibility. Things work out so that we can send a probe to pass the interstellar object before it loops around the sun, and then we can send another probe to pass it after it loops around the sun. We would get a shitload of data because of that. We could, because we'd be able to see the differences in the object after it went through the hottest part of the solar system. That's really big stuff. I mean, some of the comets that are visible don't show up until after they've passed the sun, because that's only when they get hot enough to give off enough gas that we can see them.
Anyone in answer to the difficult questions in life, the I don't know what happens after I die, or please, what happens if my loved ones die, or how can I stop myself dying? The big questions gives you an easy bullshit answer, and you go, well, do you have any evidence for that? And they go, there's more to life than evidence. Get in the fucking sack.
From theregister.com. One long sentence is all it takes to make LLMs misbehave. Security researchers from Palo Alto Network's Unit 42 have discovered the key to getting large language model chatbots to ignore their guardrails, and it's quite simple. You just have to ensure that your prompt uses terrible grammar and is one massive run-on sentence like this one, which includes all the information before any full stop, which would give the guardrails a chance to kick in before the jailbreak can take effect and guide the model into providing a toxic or otherwise verboten response the developers had hoped would be filtered out. The paper also offers a logic gap analysis approach as a potential benchmark for protecting models against such attacks. Our research introduces a critical concept, the refusal affirmation logic gap. Researchers Tony Lee, apologies if I mispronounce his name, and Hongliang Liu, again apologies if I mispronounced that name. It's been a very long time since I took Mandarin Chinese courses. Explained in a Unit 42 blog post. This refers to the idea that the training process isn't actually eliminating the potential for a harmful response, it's just making it less likely. There remains potential for an attacker to close the gap and uncover a harmful response after all. Okay, I'm no fan of LLMs for complicated reasons, some of which Patreon supporters know, others of which they will find out in the near future. But why I bring this up will become apparent with this next story. From AnswersInGenesis.org. The Chatbot and the Great Commission. In May 2025, the blockbuster Mission Impossible franchise launched what is presumed its final installment, Dead Reckoning. After decades of completing impossible missions, Ethan Hunt faces his deadliest foe yet, an artificial intelligence called the Entity. Through highly refined algorithms that predict outcomes, the Entity is constantly outpacing Hunt and his team in its quest to destroy humanity and preserve itself. While Dead Reckoning was still in production, the Answers and Genesis technology teams were offered their own mission with artificial intelligence. I am so not sticking the Mission Impossible theme in any of this shit. A mission they cautiously accepted. Leading the teams were Joel Lineweber, Vice President of Design and Web Development, and Frost Smith, Director of Web Content. I'm sorry. Those fucking names. To start their mission, they partnered with Glue AI, a faith-centered artificial intelligence platform designed to help churches, ministries, and nonprofits implement a values-based AI. Glue AI's algorithms had taken years to develop and included guards against one of generative AI's biggest flaws, hallucinations, i.e. fabricated or incorrect information. Generative AI models like ChatGPT are not fact checkers or databases. They are large language models trained to predict the next word based on patterns, allowing them to generate statements that sometimes sound plausible, even though they are incorrect. I am not suggesting you go out and play with Answers in Genesis chatbot to see if you can get it to spit out shit that would embarrass them. I've just provided you information on how you might be able to do that. I am not joking when I say I am not encouraging you. As I will make apparent to Patreon supporters in the near future, these LLMs are environmental disasters, and that is just the beginning of why they are terrible and should not be in widespread use. So, but if you're going to fuck around with it in a way that fucks it up, okay? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying if you do, try and fuck that fucker up, okay?
There's a general kind of, in the media, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that people don't know about numbers. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a dweeb, all right? I apologize. I'm a bit of a nerd about these kind of things. I get really pissed off when people give out about, like, crime going up, when say the numbers are definitely going down. And then if you go, but the numbers are going down, they go, but the fear of crime is rising. And you're going, well, so fucking what? You know what I mean? Zombies are at an all-time low level, but the fear of zombies could be incredibly high. It doesn't mean we have to have government policies to deal with the fear of zombies. It's ridiculous, for Christ's sake.
Okay. Before we go any further, I want to play this clip of Charlie Kirk speaking at an event.
Now, we must also be real. We must be honest with the population. Having an armed citizenry comes with a price. And that is part of liberty. Driving comes with a price. 50,000 people die on the road every year. That's a price. You get rid of driving, you'd have 50,000 less auto fatalities. But we have decided that the benefit of driving, speed, accessibility, mobility, having products, services, is worth the cost of 50,000 people dying on the road. Wow. So we need to be very clear that you're not going to get gun deaths to zero. It will not happen. Right. You can significantly reduce them through having more fathers in the home, by having more armed guards in front of schools.
Now, why did I pick that clip? Part of it's fairly obvious. Charlie Kirk seemed to think that the level of gun deaths we have in this country, which is comparable to the number of automotive deaths we have in this country, was an acceptable price to be able to pay for basically unrestricted ownership of guns. Yes, there are people who cannot own guns by law, but compared to a lot of other countries, we have unrestricted gun laws. And if I can find the article, I will drop it in the show notes, but there is currently a case making its way through the courts that the objective is to basically do away with the laws that prohibit people from owning machine guns. And when I say machine guns, I mean fully automatic weapons that, have been banned. Well, they've not been banned, but since the 1930s, if you wanted to own one, you had to go through a bunch of hoops to get those kinds of weapons, and most gun owners weren't willing to do that. So, yeah. Another thing I want to point out is that the process by which somebody gets a driver's license and is able to drive a car is far more arduous than the process that one has to go through to buy a gun. So, in, almost every state, if you want to have a driver's license and drive a car, you have to take some kind of, well, you have to pass a written test, and you have to have insurance. In some cases, probably every state now, but it hasn't always been the case. You didn't have to take driver's training. And there are far fewer cars in America than there are guns. And if you want to buy a gun in the U.S., you just have to be a certain age and be a legal resident of the U.S. You don't even have to be a citizen. So if the only changes we made to gun laws in the U.S. was you had to take a training course before you could buy a gun, and you had to have some form of insurance, we could theoretically lower the number of people killed by guns in this country each year to to fewer than 50,000. Perhaps even dramatically lower. But we're not willing to do that. Because we have the cult of the gun in this country. We think that problems can be solved with guns. And look, I grew up in a family of hunters. I, as a machinist, have made gun parts. I understand the issue about not only there being legitimate uses for guns that don't involve killing humans, but I also know that if you ban firearms the wrong way, they're not that hard to make. Provided you have the necessary skills, it does take you a couple of years to get those skills. But that doesn't mean we have to live in a society that is a war zone compared to other industrialized nations. And it's I can't go over recall the numbers, but me and Bruce Carlson of My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, had talked about this over the internet, over DMs, because I was like, all right, in terms of people being killed in the U.S. by guns, as a percentage, are we not reaching levels akin to what, you would have seen in Latin American countries at the height of things like the Iran, like the Contras and the various other death squads, and we were pretty close, a few percentage points. It is easy as a lot of Republican women have found out to be for something when you don't think it's going to impact your life. And then once the people you've supported get into power and decide that they're going to do the thing that they said they were going to do, and you realize that, oh no, it made your life uncomfortable, that, that is something they often have times grappling with. There was that Texas state representative a while back who was upset because she had an ectopic pregnancy, which needed to be terminated because ectopic pregnancies are fatal. And when she went to the ER, they said, well, you're not at death's door, so there's nothing we can do for you. And she had supported all the various anti-abortion efforts in Texas. And if she had been a decent human being, she would have realized at that moment she was wrong. But instead, she blamed Democrats for the issue, even though the fucking law makes doctors less inclined to perform a necessary medical procedure because they're worried about being prosecuted for performing said procedure. People like Charlie Kirk see the ready availability of guns in our country as somehow being necessary, and any casualties because of that as, just a thing that happens and you can't really do anything about. They do not think for a moment that ready access to firearms could cause pain and suffering to anyone they know or they care about. This goes back to the othering that I talked about in the beginning of this episode. Here's a question that is related but cannot be answered. If Charlie Kirk knew that his support of lax gun control in our country would lead to his death, would he still support it? I don't know. I'm not going to hesitate. But hesitate. I don't know why I picked that word. I'm not going to speculate on what his thought processes would be. I have no fucking clue. Okay? I can't. But I can tell you that on a number of positions I hold, I have already thought about whether or not they would lead to my death, and I've said that if that happens because I think the end objective is more important. And this also applies to some silly bullshit as well. Allow me to explain. I believe I have mentioned on this podcast, and if I haven't mentioned it on this side, the Patreon supporters certainly know about it. I was a consultant on a restoration of a 1948 Tucker. The specific car was 1003. It was owned prior to my consulting work on it by a fellow named George Lucas. may have hurt him. Anyways, my goal as, being a consultant on that restoration was not so much credit or anything like that. I wanted to be able to document as much about the cars as I possibly could. And there was a time, it did not come to pass, where it looked like I was going to be able to photograph the underside of the car, and in order to do this, they would have to lift the car up in the air with a forklift, and I would have to crawl under it with a camera. This is dangerous. And my commentary to the folks involved, if we were going to do that, I'll skip the reasons why that didn't happen, was, if anything happens, I'm flinging the camera out. Worry about that. Don't worry about me. And as you all know, I'm a big-ass space geek. If there was, I would happily trade places with any astronaut on any mission, including the ones on Challenger and Columbia. Just because. Again, I don't know if Charlie Kirk ever thought he might have to take a bullet for his beliefs. Don't really care. But it is something that if you have a strongly held belief, you really need to think about. Because if you're not, if you're not willing to accept the worst case scenario for your belief, then maybe it's not a belief worth holding. I mean, because I'll tell you right now, if I encounter a big cat, say a bobcat, a panther, or, somehow an escaped lion or tiger, out and about, here, kitty, kitty is probably going to be my last words. Knowing that, there's a non-zero chance that I could be eaten by the cat, but if I'm seeing it and it's like, well, maybe they're somebody's pet and they got lost or whatever, and I can, keep it from being shot or whatever by some fucking asshole, then I'd like to do that. Absolutely none of us know how any of this is going to play out. Sorry. Nibbler decided to hop on the back of the chair for a second. And that didn't go well because Fuzznuts was already there, sucking his toes. But we do not know how this thing is going to play out with the murder of Charlie Kirk. We don't know who the shooter is. We don't know the reasons the shooter gave. But I want all of you out there, because regardless of how this shakes out with his death in the near future, we're all going to have to face a point where we say, this is something that I believe in, and if I die because of my belief, it is not ideal, but it is something I'm willing to do. And other things you're going to say, well, yeah, I believe this is a good idea, but I'm not willing to die for it. I'm not criticizing where you fall on those subjects. I'm just saying you need to know where those things lie so you can make the right decisions going forward. I mean, we all have, we have certain things we know we'd be willing to die for. I'm sure there's not a parent out there who would not be willing to die to protect their child. But we also have other things that in the abstract we might not realize we're not willing to die for it, because it is an abstract concept to us. We need to make it real. And once we've made it real, we need to think, okay, how do I deal with this? If it's a belief you're willing to die for, how do you ensure that you can still support that belief but not be at such a risk of dying? How, or, if it's a belief you're not willing to die for, how, where exactly do you draw the line at an encroachment on it? Because certain circumstances, somebody hurts Fuzznuts, I'll go all fucking John Wick on their ass. And other circumstances, it's like, well, it's terrible, but there's, nothing that can be done about it. And, you gotta know those limits. And it's going to be very, very important that you're cognizant of them as soon as possible. Because, again, we don't know how this is going to play out. We don't know the motivations of the shooter. And the motivations of the shooter may be unimportant because, let's say the shooter was a Nazi who thought Charlie Kirk wasn't fascist enough. Do you think that's going to stop Trump and company from encroaching on our civil rights? Probably not. And if the shooter was somebody who had liberal viewpoints and shot Kirk, all us liberals are going to be condemned for that, or leftists. You need to think. Okay. I've got to get out of here because it's getting late. You may be able to hear that train in the background, which tells me it's really getting late. I will talk to you all soon, and may science guide your path.
That's it for this episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes. It's also on Stitcher, and most of the episodes are on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter at tparkatheist, and it's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to donate to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show's notes page. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker.
Say goodnight, Fuzznuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.